One of the hardest questions to answer with comics is a very basic one. Where do I begin? With so many years of continuity and endless amount of series to choose from, finding a starting point can be difficult, but that's where this series comes in. Each week I look at all the comics coming out to pick out ongoing series starting new arcs, notable new series, and trades and graphic novels coming out. Then, to finish things up, I pick out my starting point of the week, the starting point I'm most excited about coming out this week. Let's kick things off by looking at notable new series debuting this week. So we're starting a new month, and we have a lot of new titles to get through, a lot of new series coming out this week. Most notably, probably, is Suicide Squad Get Joker #1. You know, we do have the Suicide Squad movie coming out, so it makes sense we're getting a Suicide comic. We're also getting the regular series as well, you know, corporate synergy at its best. Now, why I'm excited about this is a Black Label book, so it's taking in place outside of normal DC continuity, although I don't know what normal DC continuity means anymore, because it's like everything's real, so who knows. But with Black Label, you get more of an adult theme, which seems like it'd go with Suicide Squad, which I believe is R-rated, so if you love that movie, you want more of it. Although this is probably going to be a very different flavor. This is with writer Brian Azzarello, who is a very well-accomplished writer within the world of comics. He probably wrote the most infamous Black Label book with Batman Damned. I'm actually kind of surprised he came back to write a book like this with all the fallout that was there. One of the artists, Alex Maleev, who is a great artist as well. This is the first time, which is kind of crazy because they both had a career. They've both been like kind of rising with their careers around the same time, but this is the first time they're working together. So there you go. Again, this is also based on getting Joker, and we do have a plethora of Joker content. We'll get to another Joker series debuting this week as well. We have the Joker comic, we get the Joker War. There's a lot of Joker stuff out there. So part of me is happy we're getting a Black Label book that's not a Batman book, although it's Batman adjacent. So there you go. But if there's anything to hang your hat on, this is a really solid creative team. So I'm kind of excited to see what they can do together. And again, if you're really excited for Suicide Squad, you want more of it, you want to jump into something fresh, this might be a good series to check out. DC is not done with Joker content, as this week we're getting Joker Puzzlebox #1, and I'm the first person to say let's not have another Joker book, or let's put Joker on the shelf for, I don't know, a decade or so before we bring him back out. However, I will say that this book I've heard a lot of people say a lot of great things about. It was actually a digital first book that's now finally seeing print, so maybe there is something here. And when I look at the fact that it's written by Matthew Rosenberg, who I'm a big fan of, I actually talked about him last week when we mentioned the King in Black Thunderbolts trade paperback, which that was great, and I was happy to see that come out. And it's weird because I think he has a deal with Marvel where he's exclusive with them, but I guess that may be not the case anymore because he's doing more DC work, which I'm all for. More Matthew Rosenberg is not a bad thing. I will say, when I think of him and what works for him, he tends to have a little bit of a more snarky style. I don't necessarily ever see him getting like the terror you can get out of a character like Joker, but I'm be happy to prove him wrong. I mean, I just haven't seen it yet. Doesn't mean he can't do it. And like I said, I've heard really good things about it. It's about Joker who's captured, and there's again this puzzle box that has also all these different clues. It's supposed to be mind-bending and things like that. So even if you're, maybe like me and you see Joker and you're like, we already have a Joker comic, we just had the Joker War, we're getting Joker and Suicide Squad, do we need more Joker stuff? Like I said, I get why people would easily dismiss it, because all of DC right now is like 90% Batman or Batman-related stuff, but if it can be good, I don't necessarily try to dismiss anything based upon concept. I try to experience it first and judge it based on execution. So with all that said, we'll check out this first issue and see how it goes. So with Joker, we talked about how he can be an overexposed character, and now we're getting to another character who can often be overexposed as well, although not really the case anymore with Deadpool Black, White, and Red. And this is another anthology series, which again, we're seeing more and more pop up. I get it with Batman and Superman. Wolverine, we'll actually talk about the Wolverine book later when we talk about trades coming out this week, but now Deadpool has his own series, and there's actually not even like a Deadpool ongoing right now, or there was. It hasn't really had the cachet it used to. Deadpool used to be like Marvel's hot item. I think it kind of went away because they utilized it a little bit too much. There was too many Deadpool, too much Deadpool, and people kind of ran its course really quickly. But, you know, something like this can help bring it back. I mean, there was the Carnage one as well. And again, it all comes down to who are the creative team? Who are the people behind this issue? And when I look at some of the names, I'm excited, starting with Tom Taylor. That has me excited, huge Tom Taylor fan. But actually, probably more so is James Stelco is a part of this book. And I think he's like a perfect person you'd want to get for a book like this, because most likely you're not going to get James Stelco in a monthly series due to the quality of his art. It's very detailed, so I don't know, I would love it, it'd be fantastic, but seeing him in the Marvel world at all, even if it's a short story, that's exciting. And Bresson's here as well, and he's, you know, been part of the Wolverine world as well, so, you know, he's a pretty quality writer. So that again, looking at the general talent for this issue, it could lead to something. Deadpool is a character that has had a big impact on my fandom as well. I mentioned in past videos how Cable and Deadpool was a big comic that brought me back into comics, so I always have a soft spot for him. I did, you know, get off of the character for a while because the series wasn't really clicking with me, even the recent stuff, even Scotty Young's run, which I was really excited for. I don't know, for some reason I felt like that should really work, and it didn't. The current run, I think, was done by Kelly Thompson, and I don't know, again, it should work, but it didn't. But maybe something like this will be a little bit better, a little bit, you know, you kind of get come in, come out with short stories, so that actually might suit a character like Deadpool a little bit more. You could take more chances, not have to worry about continuity and all that as well. So we'll see how it all works out this week. Also from Marvel this week, we have Spirit of Vengeance #1, and when I saw this, I'm like, oh, they're going to try to do a new Ghost Rider series. It feels like every so often, and we actually had one about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, kind of came and went, but hey, maybe this one will work. Then I realized, although this is Spirit of Vengeance, this is a completely different character. It's not a new character, it's a character that actually debuted in old Doctor Strange comics, but now they're bringing it back. And then when I looked at the writer, I'm like, I don't know this writer. Who is this person? Taboo. I was like, weird. But then I realized Taboo is actually comic book writer, but also part of the Black Eyed Peas. So now Taboo is going to be a comic book writer as well. I'm always a little bit hesitant with that. You know, sometimes you get celebrities, people from the outside world, they put them on a book like this, something that's like, you know, somewhat has notoriety, has somewhat of a name, like CM Punk, for example, did like a Shang-Chi book way back when, and that was kind of, you know, kind of came and went. So again, something like the Spirit of Vengeance, it has legacy within Marvel, but it's not like one of Marvel's best books, and you get like a celebrity that people know, although I don't know if Black Eyed Peas are really a thing anymore like they used to be, and seeing, can this lead to something good? You know, writing comics is really, really difficult. It's not an easy thing to do, but if it can put extra eyes within, you know, within the market, maybe you can get some people. I don't know how effective that is. We shall see. Also, don't want to dismiss someone just because, you know, put people into a box saying, no, you're this type of entertainer, you're not a good writer, because maybe Taboo is an amazing comic book writer. I don't know, but I'm interested just to see this different approach with this character that's going to be like Sorcerer Supreme, potentially, you know, working with Johnny Blaze, utilizing the Spirit of Vengeance. I'm always for new directions because, you know, Ghost Rider, it was a huge character in the 90s a bit, and hasn't really been much of anything. They have done different redesigns with different characters, so could this be another one that sticks? I hope so. There's a lot of questions regarding this book. This could be one of those things that ends up being a gem of the week, like last week, Amazing Fantasy #1, I thought was kind of came out of nowhere. It was really fun. This could be that. It could also be something that just crashes and burns and is awful, and then we try to forget it exists. So somewhat like having all those different possibilities is somewhat exciting sometimes. So, you know, we'll see how it goes. The new series I'm probably the most excited about coming out this week is The Me You Love in the Dark #1, because this is the creative team behind Middle West. I mentioned Scotty Young earlier. He is the writer. Joe Corina is the artist, and I thought Middle West was a fantastic book, potentially maybe Scotty Young's best work with comics, and I just thought, you know, Joe Corina's art really matched with Scotty Young's style. It had a similar look, but it was a bit more detailed. And this story is something very different. Middle West was a really personal tale, you know, about this boy in a fantasy world dealing with abuse. This is about an artist who goes into the woods to try to, you know, decompress, to write a story, and then bad things happen. It's compared to things like Stephen King, and it does have a similar premise to that. So it does seem like it's more the horror route, which, I don't know, like Scotty Young, I can definitely see if you turn his style a little bit, like Wizard of Oz, for example, has some horror elements as well. Even Middle West, it wasn't necessarily a horror book, but being in the fanatical world, there are times it did definitely get, scary and like that. So potentially here another thriller. So I'm liking seeing Scotty Young really expand his repertoire as a writer and as a creator. And I love seeing, creative teams coming back, especially when they have a successful book like Middle West. So if you were a big fan of Middle West and you enjoyed that book, you probably want to check this out. And also if you're a Stephen King fan and you like that type of horror, this seems like it might be up your alley as well. So again, if looking at all the new series that are coming out, and I still have more to go through, easily this is the one I'm most anticipating, mostly because of the creative team. Scout Comics this week, we have We Don't Kill Spiders #1, and often with Scout Comics I don't know much about the creative teams and coming in blind regarding that, just looking at the premise, and this does look like a fun premise, combining again horror and fantasy in a bit, maybe somewhat of historical fiction as you're dealing with a Norse Viking who's investigating murders in this small village, and comes across a witch who wants to help him out. So it does seem like a clashing of styles there in a little bit, right? With a Viking partnering with a witch to investigate murders, like NYPD Blue, the Viking years or something. Which, that's actually interesting. How do you investigate murders back in the time when technology was not where it is today by any stretch of the imagination? Kind of a classic detective story, but in a very different time and place. That can be kind of cool. That's actually a really fresh and different idea that I don't know if I've really seen successfully done in a comic book before. And when you add in a bit of magic as well, just to make it a little bit extra spicy, Scout Comics is pretty successful. They do a lot of interesting things. They have a lot of good genre books. So excited to see if this one will be another one to add to the list. I think I need to start a running tally to see how many weeks in a row do I come across a new #1 written by Cullen Bunn, because I feel like if I started it a lot earlier, it would have a pretty large number. Right now we're up to 2, so we'll see what happens next week, as he has a new #1 again this week with Lucky Devil #1, and this is coming from Dark Horse Comics. This is a story about an exorcist that's kind of gone wrong. You have this individual who's like a schlub who simply can't get out of his own right way. He goes into an exorcism to get rid of this devil that's also possessed him, because what else is new? Just another bad day. And then of course the exorcism doesn't go as planned, and that leads to bad things as well, and potentially now he just has this devil that he's dealing with moving forward. So knowing Cullen Bunn, he has a knack for supernatural stories, sometimes horror, sometimes more serious. This definitely seems more up the line of being more comedic. It's been compared to something like Six Gun, which isn't necessarily a horror story, but it does cross genres, and it's definitely more on the fun level. Cullen Bunn can write some really dark and depressing stuff. I've already seen that this year. This doesn't seem to be that. It seems to be somewhat a bit different. So if you're a person that is trying to collect all the Cullen Bunn books, good luck, because that's got to be quite difficult. But if you're a fan of his work, which there's a lot of reason to be, he's one of the most prolific writers out there right now for a reason. Definitely check this out. This looks like it could be a lot of fun in a very twisted and disturbed way. But I don't think with Cullen Bunn you would expect anything different. From Behemoth Comics this week, we have Cinnamon #1, which, again, talking about books that have intriguing premises, this is another one where this is a story told through the eyes of a house cat or through a cat, and that has me intrigued, because when I look at the cover of this, you see this, this cat holding this like weapon axe, and I'm thinking, is this another fantasy tale? But now with that is a kind of a combination of both. It's like what a cat actually sees, like those classic memes of what people think I do, what I actually do. But imagine if that was a comic book, and instead of it being a person, it being a cat. What a cat actually thinks it looks like when it's traversing the world, going after what it needs, trying to find catnip, all those fun things. So, or maybe it's a little bit of both. I don't know. Again, this is a book I'm coming into very much blind, out of just looking at the solicit and a creative team or creator, writer, artist I don't know much about. Behemoth this year has had some pretty good stuff. Vietnam Horror, for example, has been a very interesting book, to say the least. And they've had The Girl Walks at Home at Night. I think I got the title right, which was a pretty big hit as well. So the thing with Behemoth Comics, though, is that they're often hard to find if you're trying to get them physical form. So if you're looking for it, definitely let your shop know probably ahead of time if you can, if you want to check it out. They are often available digitally, although their digital platform it's hard to tell. Sometimes they're out the same week as their weekly physical books. Sometimes they come out much later. it's hard to figure out sometimes with Behemoth, but a lot of their books that were really good this year are now available on Comixology and other digital platforms. So this one, again, the cover definitely gets my eye. I just definitely like the art style and the look of it, and if the book can be anything like that, it should be one of the better books this week. Also out this week for Rick and Morty fans is Trover Saves the Universe #1, and hopefully this doesn't make me lose a whole lot of cred, but Rick and Morty is one of those properties I simply haven't really got into. I've watched like a couple episodes. I know it's really well acclaimed. I actually like the creators of it. Dennis Hopeless, who's doing a lot of the writing this year. I like a lot of his comics, but it's just one of those things where there's only so much time, so I've not had the opportunity to read this. So I'm looking at the solicit for this, and I'm like, I have no idea what any of this means. However, I do know that there are a lot of Rick and Morty fans out there. I do know that Rick and Morty comics tend to be really well acclaimed. Those are often written by Carl Starks, but he's not writing this. It's a different creative team, and I guess this exists within that same universe, but a different part of the universe. Again, I am a novice with all this. I am speaking through ignorance, unfortunately, but I did want to bring it up because, this is the type of comic that could appeal to people that don't usually read comics, who love that style. And like I mentioned with the Rick and Morty books, they have, just looking at reviews, reading, listening to people that have enjoyed the actual TV show, that the books have done a good job of capturing a similar spirit. And often that's not the case. Usually when you get the comic book version of something, especially when it's active, it can be kind of awful in a lot of ways, just trying to repeat the same jokes or the voice isn't there. That hasn't been the case previously, so hopefully that'll be the same thing with this new series. A lot of new #1s coming out this week. Those are the ones that definitely caught my eye. But let's move over to the world of ongoing series starting new arcs. The first ongoing series starting a new arc that we're going to talk about this week is Sensational Wonder Woman #6, and this is similar to the Joker Puzzlebox books, a digital series that is now seeing print, and because of that, each issue tends to be standalone, a one-shot, so then each issue is a new arc, easy to jump into. And this one is about Amazons who've been brainwashed, and Wonder Woman has to try to fight them off. And how do you fight off your own friends without hurting them? That classic quandary. So, sometimes like a character like Wonder Woman, we see a lot that her runs aren't as good as we hope, because I feel like a lot of people try to just rewrite everything about the character, and then you kind of just are ever in this never-ending loop that simply can never progress forward. The benefit of a book like Sensational Wonder Woman is that you don't have the time to do that. They're just one-shots, so you just kind of have to tell your story and do it as quickly and as effectively as possible. So some of the Sensational Wonder Woman issues so far have been pretty good. Some have been not so great. The writer here is Cinna Grace, which is a writer I don't know much about, so it's hard to go into with any set level of expectations. But in a way, sometimes that's good. I think a book like this, giving it to people that aren't necessarily brand names, or those that are trying to make their way and not having to worry about endless amount of continuity, try to fit into some major event, just tell one story, see how good you are, and then go from there. I mean, if you look at the trajectory of a lot of great comic book creators, often it's starting with a book like this, and sometimes it's cool to kind of get in the ground for, if you really like it, being like, oh, this is actually a really strong issue, and then continue with that creator to see them progress throughout their career. Not saying that's going to happen, it's putting a lot of pressure on one issue, but if you're not digging the current Wonder Woman run, which actually has been quite good, actually one I would recommend checking out, but if you're far behind with that and you are a Wonder Woman fan, or you've been wanting to stick your toe into the world of Wonder Woman comics, a book like this may be a good way to go. The War of the Bounty Hunters lives on with War of the Bounty Hunters Forlom and Zuckuss #1. My apologies if I pronounce that incorrectly. And I like to think myself as a decent-sized Star Wars fan. I've watched the movies multiple times. I've watched cartoons. I read some of the comics. I read some of the books. And these are two characters that I know nothing about. I have never heard of them before this book. I don't know if they're new or if they're old, what the deal is. So perhaps they are much more popular than I realize. I know the Star Wars fans are pretty fanatical, and there's a big universe out there. So if you are a huge fan of these characters, I've been somewhat keeping up with the War of the Bounty Hunters. I feel like it's really hard to keep up with because each week there are new issues, new series. So the little bit I've read, I've enjoyed, but I do feel like I'm already overwhelmed. And often when I get to a point like that, I'm just like, I'm gonna tap out, and maybe I'll come back to it. I don't see a lot of people talking great things about it right now. Not that it can't be great. It just, you know, when Star Wars books are often really good, I tend to see that in some way and form. I haven't yet. Again, that's not saying they aren't great, but what I did read, I liked. Perhaps something like this being a one-shot and then a continuous series, you know, can bring me back in, give me a better idea of what's going on. So we shall see. I know this series is going on until October, I believe. This War of the Bounty Hunters, which is pretty expansive. It's probably the biggest event Star Wars has had since it's come over to Marvel. If you've been loving it and you've been reading it, again, I debated about putting this in the new number ones, but technically it's an arc within an ongoing series, so that's why it's here. Comics are complicated sometimes, and sometimes that's why it's hard to dig into them as much as you want to. But anyways, just know that's coming out this week. Also starting a new arc this week, kind of, is Inkblot number 11. And I tend to bring up this book every time I do a starting point video because it's another one of those books where every issue is a standalone story for the most part. Although you do have this undercurrent story that tends to connect them all. And my guess is this is a series that's nearing its end. I'm not sure. This has been an interesting journey to read. These are newer creators that are, you know, I think definitely finding their way, and I felt like you saw that within this book. That was as much as fun of a journey as the stories themselves. Looking at the story for this specific issue, it's about this cat that traverses different dimensions, and then each dimension there tends to be a problem that he helps create. Sometimes he helps solve, but it's a really good example of like short storytelling. And in this issue, he goes into a world in which a bunch of children have had to bury their parents because they were killed by this frost giant, and now they're going to potentially run into that person again. And you have this cat that's there. It's a magical cat that doesn't talk or anything like that. So what can that lead to? Just that premise alone, it tends to have, it has a little bit more of a sense of seriousness than this series tends to have. It's more of the whimsical side of fantasy, but it seems like maybe as this is nearing its end, it's going to get a tad more serious. I don't know, but of all the new Inkblot issues, this is the one I'm probably the most intrigued by, just because of the premise of this issue. So this was another issue where I wasn't sure where it should go. Should it go with new number one? Should it go here? I thought since this isn't necessarily a new series, it's best to go here because this is the best of Casey Jones number one, and IDW has done these with pretty much every Turtles type of figure, from all the different characters to now Casey Jones. And it tends to be reprintings of other classic issues focused on that specific character. So why it's, you know, considered a new arc for me is because technically it's just a good jumping on point if you're like a huge Casey Jones fan, or you want to read some of the Casey Jones comics and you're not sure where to begin. This is a good jumping on point, and then you can kind of take it and go from there and maybe check out some of the other best of issues. My guess is maybe they'll be combining all these into one trade paperback. I don't know for sure, but I do think all these little, you know, one-shots that they do are great ways of kind of checking out classic stories, checking out Turtles-centric stories, because, you know, the current series is over 100 issues. It can be somewhat intimidating to jump into, but a book like this is designed to be welcoming to new readers. I sound like a bit of a broken record this week because this is another series that technically is a number one, but it's kind of like a fake number one that tends to happen a lot, where this is Amber Blake Operation Dragonfly number one. And Amber Blake was a series that was also published by IDW, now it's through a new publisher, and I think it was a really slept on book. It reminded me a lot of like Alias, for example, where you have these people that was undercover. It was a kind of a spy story with a lot of twists and turns. Another cool thing about it was that it was actually oversized, but normal price, which you don't very much see, which I wonder if that's why it didn't get the attention it deserved, because, you know, a lot of people don't like the oversized comics. It felt like a very much like a European style book. So if you're looking for something different, I don't know. My guess is with this being a new publisher, it'll probably be a good jumping on point. You don't have to necessarily read the series before, but if you do read this first issue and you like it and you want to check it out, definitely advise checking out that previous series. Get it in a physical form as you can, because I've read it in digital and I do think it was made for the bigger format. I think it reads much better. There's a lot of use or bigger panels of multiple panels on a page. In digital, you don't really get the expansive look as you would in single issues. So I thought this book was done and over with. I didn't think it was coming back, but happy another publisher is picking it up. Ongoing series starting a new arc this week is Firepower number 14. This is, of course, written by Robert Kirkman with art by Chris Samnee, and this, it seems like, to be the lull after all the insanity of the previous issues. There was a lot going on with the last 30 issues, from massive wars to, you know, people coming back from the dead, up to people finding out secrets, and now it seems like this is going to be issue as the families going back to their normal lives, just to kind of deal with those repercussions. Your classic take a breath issue. So will this be an issue to jump onto? Potentially, probably not. I do think, you know, Robert Kirkman's stuff built upon itself really well, so it's really hard to jump in anywhere minus the beginning. But I do think the thing with Firepower is it is a very quick read. It's, you know, Robert Kirkman, I think he does tend to write towards the trade. His single issues are good, but I definitely think when you read them all together, you're really getting what he's writing. Like, that's where his pacing works the best. So if you're interested in this book, the trades are out. Do know that it actually starts with a trade first and then gets into the actual issues, which are again in trade. But it's a really, like, well told kind of martial arts story. It's taking a lot from classic things like Iron Fist and doing an Avatar. You know, many stories that came before, but doing its own version of it with art by Chris Samnee, who I again think is one of the best in the game when it comes to, especially when it comes to making action sequences and things like that. There's just an endless well flow to all of his art. You see it in a lot of things, like his run on Captain America and Daredevil, and putting in a martial arts book like this was a stroke of genius, and he's been doing fantastic work with it. So this has been, to me, one of the most consistent books I think that Kirkman's put out since Walking Dead, and has a similar sense of character with that, where you do have this ever expansive character list, but it always still feels like you have an idea of who every person is and what the personality is. So I'm looking forward to this issue, just to see, like, now we're going to get an opportunity kind of to deal with a lot of the revelations we saw, but more on a personal level. It'd probably be, my guess is, a little bit of a slower issue, but you never know when it comes to Kirkman. He's the king of surprises. Let's move over to the world of trades and graphic novels coming out this week. The first trade we're going to talk about this week is The Last God hardcover, coming from DC/Black Label Comics. And this is probably the most notable because it's written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, who is becoming a bigger and bigger name in the world of comics, as he's writing Superman or Action Comics right now. He also has an Alien series, so he seems like he's doing a lot of work for both Marvel and DC. And The Last God was, I think, really the last book he wrote before he became more and more notable. It was part of Black Label. It's a fantasy book, and when you talk about world building, this has a lot of it. I will say this was a book that I couldn't necessarily get into. Not that it was bad, it just wasn't really clicking with my sensibilities. I like fantasy, but this was hard fantasy, like Dungeons and Dragons, like really diving deep into all the level details. The craftsmanship was impressive. There's no doubt about that. Objectively, it's a really strong comic, especially if that's kind of the thing you're into. You'd want to check it out. It's probably going to be even better in hardcover form because it was a true epic in that way. So maybe I'll go back and check it out, and maybe all together I'll enjoy it more. Again, it wasn't that it was a bad comic. It was just sometimes you read something and you're like, this isn't for me. That was the case with this. So I don't know, but if you are a fan of his style, I've been liking what he's doing, I will say this is a very different book than something like Action Comics. However, if you're a fan of fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings, whatever it may be, I definitely think you need to check this book out because it's probably going to work with you a great deal. I mentioned with Deadpool, him getting his own black, white, and red book this week, and a new issue coming out. And this week is also the trade release of Wolverine, black, white, and red. So, you know, it's almost like they're, you know, a relay race where, you know, we get the beginning of one and the trade of another. And again, these are, I do wonder what this would be like in trade, because each issue is a combination of a number of short stories. So as a trade, this is going to be packed with different short stories. And I read most of these. Some issues I liked more than others. I will say I was surprised by how graphic the series got. Like, sometimes you think, oh, Marvel won't be too violent. It got violent. They utilized that red a great deal with a combination of a lot of great artists. I will say, even if I didn't love all the stories all the time, the art was really great. Probably my favorite issue was the one when it had Jorge Fornes as an artist. He had this kind of samurai story where Wolverine was going into Japan, and he killed it on that issue. No surprise, he's one of today's best artists. But again, there's a lot of artists throughout, and I didn't read every single issue, but And I did like it, even if I wasn't digging with the story. It always looked really great in a violent way. So, as a Wolverine fan, if you know a Wolverine fan, this is really good to get them, because this is Wolverine in all his glory, all his bloody glory, which you don't always get in especially in media, or especially in comics all the time. And you know, this to me was like the Wolverine of old in a lot of ways. Coming from Boom this week, we have the trade paperback release of The Expanse, and this has been released before, but The Expanse I really liked the first book, and I never went to the other issues, and I know the TV series is really popular, and I heard really good things about the comic, so there's all these different ways to experience the Expanse universe, and I haven't done it nearly as much outside of reading the first book. I will say, right when I read the first book, I heard that there was going to be a TV show, got super excited, and never ended up watching it. There's just so much stuff, it's hard to keep up with, but I know there's tons of fans out there, obviously, because of how popular it is, and I've heard, based upon what I've seen, that the comics do a pretty good job of capturing what's really good about the book. So if you're a fan of the book, or maybe if you're not, or if you love the TV show, you're also just looking to get into this universe, the expanded universe, to me, what's really good about it, it's science fiction that doesn't feel like it's trying to relive different science fiction of what, like, this isn't like a new version of Star Wars or Star Trek. It has elements of more crime at the beginning. The big story that starts this is a murder investigation. What you have is this kind of conflict with different worlds of Earth and Mars, and those that are in the asteroid belt, and there's just a lot of politicking going on. Global war. There's a lot to this book. It's been a while since I read it, but again, I remember really liking it. So this is just reminding me I really need to go back and revisit this world, and maybe comic book way it will be the best way to do just that, because it is my favorite medium. So maybe this is the best way to kind of enjoy the world of the Expanse universe. What's also out this week is What's Up, Beanie? Actual Relatable Comics, which is the name of the title, not my editorial on the actual book itself, by Alina Tosi. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but this seems to be similar to something like Sarah Scribbles, which I'm a fan of, which kind of take basically comics that can exist on a digital platforms like Instagram or whatever, and it puts them into a collected format, which are just short vignettes, probably a few panels on each page, if that, speaking to life that you can relate to in some way. It's basically back in the olden days when people would get a thing called a newspaper, a physical newspaper, and go through all the news, maybe check out sports, but in the back, read the actual comic strips, stuff like that. Short stories, short kind of funny jokes, one-punch jokes that were ones that you would laugh at and enjoy, kind of quick and easy comics in a way. This is again a creator that I've never really read anything about, but it's a creator that I don't know has pretty strong notoriety as well. So again, I do really like Sarah Scribbles, and it's hard to kind of put something into a box you haven't read before, but it does seem like it is very comparable to something like that. We'll find out if I actually get a chance to read it. So it seems like this week I'm talking a lot about Rick and Morty and fantasy, and let's combine both of those with Rick and Morty versus Dungeons and Dragons. Like I mentioned, Rick and Morty is something I don't have much experience with, and again, Dungeons and Dragons, something I don't have much experience with. So I don't know if I have to turn in my geek card after this episode because of all the things I'm not into, but hey, there's a lot out there. So it's hard to kind of be into everything. I'm not against it. Like, I would love to do Dungeons and Dragons sometime just to say I did it. It seems like a lot of fun. It seems like it's a cool community. Anyways, this actual comic is, again, Rick and Morty in that universe, and I've heard interviews with the creators about this. I've heard a lot of Rick and Morty fans speak so highly of these comics, especially with how Rick and Morty can kind of come and go when it comes to actually being released and waiting for the next episode and having the comics to kind of help fill that void. I do know the new season of Rick and Morty is out, so perhaps you don't necessarily have that void right now, but if you do want Rick and Morty content, more of it, if you're a huge fan, again, check out the comics, and if you're looking, one of the best ways would be checking out this new volume that'll be out on store shelves this week. So this is an episode where I'm going to omit things I don't read. I don't know why that's happening. It feels like I'm being targeted. I don't know. But coming out this week is Queen of the Ring Wrestling Drawings by Jaime Hernandez. And this is coming from the world of Love and Rockets. And I have not really read Love and Rockets. It's one of the most notable indie comics ever created. And again, it's just one of those things I haven't had a chance to catch up with. I do want to read it, especially looking at something like this. This is existing from that world, taking a lot of the characters that have been created throughout the many years that book has existed, the different drawings. And I'm usually not personally into like art books just because I have no artistic skill whatsoever. I do like looking at them at times just to see the craftsmanship, to see how things are formed. It's a good way to learn about comics, especially if you are someone who wants to write or draw comics. A book like this can be really helpful. Don't ever, especially if you're trying to form your own style. Don't just look at the same things over and over again. Your superhero comics, your Tom McFarlane, whoever it may be. Check out especially indie comic creators and see how they, their style, so you can get a combination of everything. Especially if you are a huge Love and Rockets fan. When I first saw this, I thought it was going to be another history of the wrestling, because there's a lot of books like that, and many of them are really good. And I am interested in wrestling. So I don't know again if this is making me seem like an uncultured swine this episode, but who knows? But if you are a Love and Rockets fan, you want more of that universe, or if you're a fan of the art style and you like art books, this checks a lot of different boxes. Unfortunately, none of them my boxes, but that's irrelevant. But anyways, the most important thing, it's out this week if you want to check it out. Hey, finally something I can finally speak to with Sublime, $5 at the door. When I first saw this, though, I was like, is this a new Sublime album? Why is this in graphic novels and comics? Was this a misprint? But actually, no, it is. It's a reprinting of a comic that's been out before, but this is a softcover version of this Sublime $5 at the door, which is kind of a graphic novel retelling of the history of Sublime. And, I did come up in an era where Sublime was a very popular band. I still listen to Sublime now. I'm no one to... my musical taste is basically... I have no musical skill whatsoever. I just, music hits my ears and it makes my ears feel good, and I'd say that's music I like. I can't really speak to it. I'm musical illiterate in that way, but I do like, even if I don't like a band, I do like learning the history of musical bands from documentaries or comics. Last year, for example, there was the Bowie autobiography by Mike Allred, and that was fantastic. Biography by Mike Allred, and that was a really great read. And now this, and again, as a Sublime fan, I'm somewhat interested because, again, Sublime fortunately has a tragic history, so looking to see how that's depicted. But at the same time, if you are a music fan, you like to hear different stories in different ways, that's not just another music documentary, you may want to check out this graphic novel coming out this week. Alright, we talked about ongoing series starting new arcs, we talked about notable new number ones and trades and graphic novels coming out this week. Now let's get to it, my starting point of the week, the comic I'm most excited about coming out this week. So no need to beat around the bush with this. It's pretty obvious, because if you look at the thumbnail for this episode, it's the only book I haven't talked about this week yet, and it's a book that's probably one of my most anticipated books of the entire year, and it's run by Nate Powell and John Lewis, and it's somewhat bittersweet to be talking about this book. I thought March last year, which they worked on together, was one of the best books of that decade. To me, at least within the top 3, definitely. And now it's a continuation of that story, the continuation of John Lewis's life. Of course, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. So knowing he's not alive to see this come out, but knowing he, of course, was a civil rights icon, he was a congressman, and was willing to put his story in comic book form. If you get a chance, definitely check out some interviews that he's done. Many of them are on YouTube, where he speaks to why he chose to tell a story through comic books, which is not always something that happens. People tend to look at comic books in different ways, and when you have a comic book that has his name behind it as a co-writer or someone who is trying to tell a story in this way, I think it is a huge thing for comics. I think it shows that this medium can tell really important stories in very successful and really effective ways. And to me, when you look at March, for example, a lot of that story was told through other formats, whether it be movies, books, what have you. And I thought nothing came close to how effective it was from the March book itself, because it touched upon, it had that personal aspect because it had the personal words, but it also had the visualization as well. So you got to see the imagery with the intimacy, and it made into one of the best comics of last decade within the last 20 years. And now we're seeing that story continued. This is the first volume. I don't know if they're going to do 3 volumes again. I'm not sure, but if there was ever a must-read, and it's kind of difficult to put that label of anything. It's almost like, can this book do anything but disappoint when I'm putting this much praise on it? But that's how much I definitely felt about the original book, which is why I've been really anticipating it. This is a book that was supposed to come out previously, but unfortunately, of course, with the passing, it definitely got delayed. I think it's been delayed almost a couple years now, but now it's finally coming out. And one of the books that I really want to tell more and more people about, give it a chance. Maybe if you haven't, even check out the March trilogy. It's a book that's available in nearly every library. It's actually really cheap on Amazon. You can get all 3 books for I think under $30 or so. It usually goes on sale a great deal. It's really worth your time. It's definitely a book to have in your collection and go back to. So, excited to read this, excited to see it, and I definitely expect this. Again, not to put more and more expectations on a book before I ever get the chance to read it. It'd probably be, if my expectations play out and it ends up being anything like the March trilogy, to be one of my favorite books of the year. We shall see. But yeah, it's a really stacked week. There's a lot of comics coming out this week. A lot of new series, a lot of ongoing series starting new arcs, a lot of interesting trades coming out, and a lot of things that I don't have experience with apparently that are being released in some way. So a fun week in that. But thank you for checking out my channel. Like I said, always there's a ton of comic book channels out there, so I appreciate any view, any like, any comment. What are you excited about coming out this week? Let me know in the comic book section below. Just remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, keep reading.